And welcome, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And we are coming to the very last little section about Abraham's sojourn in Egypt, where he had to go down because of the famine in the land of Canaan. And we are coming to the end where Pharaoh sent him off. All right, so let's find the place here. Right. Vayitzav alav Paro anashim. Pharaoh commanded men with him, right? V'yishalchu oto, and they sent him ve'et ishto, together with his wife, ve'et kol asher lo, and everything that he had. And we are told that he was rewarded, that Pharaoh gave him many gifts when he took on Sarah. So here we go. We got a last little section to look at here. Interesting statement, by the way. Vayitzav alav paro anashim vaishalchu, right? Pharaoh commanded men with regards to him, right? Uh, so clearly he sent him with an accompaniment. It was done in a way that would have shown great honor to Abraham. Okay. It also, by the way, may have made sure Pharaoh was making sure that Abraham actually was on his way, but that is not the essential understanding here. It is understood to mean that he helped him. He helped him with the move. Oh, all right. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, said Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Bishvil arba pesiot, right? For on account of the four steps. Shiliva Parola Avraham, with which Pharaoh accompanied Abraham. So he took four steps along his way. So there's a general midah, I would say. I don't know that it's a halacha per se. I don't know that it's a legal issue per se, but it is considered to be a proper thing that when you have people visiting you, you honor them by taking a few steps when they depart along with them. You accompany them just briefly when they leave your home, by way of, in a sense, it's like a bookend. You welcome them and then you also accompany them just a little bit. So these four steps that Pharaoh took for Abraham, Nishtabed Bibanav, his descendants, that is Abraham's descendants, were enslaved, Arbama Ochana, 400 years. Shene'emar, as it says, for Avdum, and they served them, etc. Arbama Ochana, 400 years. Now, if you're finding this difficult to follow, you're paying attention. This is from Sota, page 46b. We're going to take a look at what Torah T'mimah has to say about this. Okay. Ein hakavana. So accepting it simply as four, and that's the connection and the honor that Pharaoh, right? I mean, look, no less than Pharaoh, accompanying Abraham, that there would be a reward to Pharaoh for such things, and four, and letting it go at that. Let's plunge on. Ein hakavana. So the point is, the intention is not the ikar hashibud arbama ochana, that the essential reason for this 400 years of enslavement, Haya Bishvil Halvaya, was on account of the accompanying. In other words, it isn't that he himself, that Pharaoh himself, personally accompanied Abraham. Daha, right? Because Abraham lo chata. So it's not that here. Let me just translate this for you. Daha Abraham lo chata bazimuma, because it's not as if Abraham was being punished, right? Abraham did not in any way commit a sin here. This isn't the fact. So it's not a quid pro quo, right? That a sense that Pharaoh was being paid back for the fact that Abraham had done something wrong. That is not the idea here. All right. So that's not there's not quid pro quo for there. You need to understand. Israelites weren't being punished in a sense on account of Abraham's sin. Abraham had not sinned. Ve'od, moreover, the ikar hasiba mehashibud, okay, because in fact, we know that the essential reason for their being enslaved, right? Mevu'ar, it's explained, it's clarified, lekaman, below the parsha, in the parsha. We're going to be told exactly what goes on here, right? There's this vision that Abraham has, where the vision between the pieces, the covenant between the pieces, and God tells Abraham there that his offspring will be enslaved for 400 years. And that is chapter 14, verse 14. Ela Rotzunama. So what's the point, right? But what he wants to say is, Shezacha Paro, that Pharaoh, in fact, merited, right? Sheyishtab'u lo, that they would be enslaved to him. In other words, it wasn't the fact that they were enslaved, that the Israelites would become enslaved. That was already predetermined and prophesied explicitly in the Torah. But the idea that Pharaoh was the one to whom they would be enslaved, v'lo lemelech acher, and not to another king. So that's why he had that benefit. V'yein b'chidushay agadot, and he refers us to. I would imagine that it's chidushay. This is a super commentary. I've mentioned it before. Uh, that is in the back of the Talmud. It's printed in all the versions of the Vilna Shas, the Vilna Babylonian Talmud edition, and I believe it's the Maharsha is the name of the rabbi, who I think his name is Shlomo Idels. Wonderful, wonderful commentary on the Gemara, and he includes both discussions about halacha and also Agadah. And this is, of course, an Agadah, so he's saying, take a look there. Okay. Umashetafas, and the fact that he held on to Hamispar Arba Psiot. Why does he say specifically 4 steps? I mean, that isn't mentioned anywhere, right? Hu Mishum, right? The reason why Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi mentions 4 steps that Pharaoh took, right? Hu Mishum de Ikar Mitzvat Halvaya. It says because the essence of the mitzvah of accompanying arba psiot. It is 4 steps. In other words, a minimum of 4 steps, or arba amot, or 4 cubits, that you walk with a person 4 cubits, and a cubit was approximately a foot, length of a footstep. So anyway, there's why you got the 4. He hasn't finished yet. We've got more to see. Vehine, and indeed, mevu'ar mikan, right? And it becomes clarified from here, the halvaya al yedei shaliach, that in fact, even if this accompaniment is by means of an agent, the benefit, right, or the credit for it goes as if he had himself accompanied him. In other words, when you see to it that someone is accompanied on their journey away from you, when they depart from you, even if you have someone else do it for you, you are still given the credit for accompanying them. And I suspect also, because we hadn't mentioned this, that part of it was to make sure that the person wasn't in any danger, that they were leaving in a safe situation. But of course, 4 cubits wouldn't really do the job, except very briefly. But at any rate, I think that there's some of that idea there. But anyway, here the point being made, though, is that you don't have to personally do it, as long as you make sure it's being done. Shehare, because we see Paro livahu Avraham al yedei anashim, because it says Pharaoh sent people. Right? It says explicitly in the verse. It says Pharaoh sent people to accompany Abraham. The kare le halvaya, but it's still being called this levaya, right? The accompaniment. V'chein, and so yesh lahavi ra'aya lazeh. We could also bring a proof for this. Me agada debate Baba Metzia pei vav bet. There is a agada, a legend in Baba Metzia, the tractate Baba Metzia, page 86b. Kol ma she'asa, here we go. This is the nature of the Agadah. Kol ma she'asa Avraham lahamalachim ba'atzmo, us, okay, that when it came to what Abraham did personally for those angels that came and visited him. Remember, we have the story later on in Vayera, in about the three angels who come to visit Abraham, and how Abraham himself personally takes care of welcoming them into his home and preparing the meal, etc. He himself does that. Asa HaKadosh Baruch Hu levanav ba'atzmo. So the Holy One, blessed be He, did for His descendants Himself, right? I believe that this is a reference to what happened in the desert, and of course coming out the Exodus from Egypt itself, how God was directly involved in all of that. V'chashiv sham, right, and there it is calculated, you might say, bischar she'Avraham holech imam l'shalcham, and also there, okay, that it was on the merit that Abraham went with them to send them on their way. V'Hashem holech lifnehem, and that is why God led the Israelites through their wanderings in the wilderness for 40 years. Remember the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire. The isal kadatach. However, if you were of the opinion, the medina mechuyab batzmo, that according to the halacha, right, one is obligated to accompany a person by oneself. In other words, that you yourself are obligated to accompany the person. In other words, right, we just said it isn't necessary, but were you to think that when it was necessary, in came my revute. But if that's the case, why would we say that Abraham would be benefited to such a degree if it were simply part of the law? He would just have been following the law of accompanying these angels. So the fact that God rewarded him to such a degree indicates that he was going above and beyond what was required of him. So you can't say, and remember, that's the point he's making, is that you don't have to do it yourself. You just have to find an agent. You need to just make sure that the job is done. Ella, right? Medina, Rashai al Yadei Shaliach. But he says, in terms of a requirement, one is permitted by means of an agent. That is, so you've fulfilled the requirement by using an agent. Vahu, the godel chavivute, the orchim, all right? And on account, back to the story of Abraham and the experience we talked about with the three angels, right? We are describing there the degree of which he loved the idea of welcoming, of offering hospitality. And on account of the degree to which Abraham treasured the mitzvah of hospitality, halach ba'atzmo. For that reason, he went personally, and for this reason, because he went personally, that's why he received a reward. Velora iti, and he said, Torah T'mimah goes on to say, Velora iti lahaposkim shia irubazeh. He says he hasn't seen any of the other commentators talk about this the way he just shared with us. He didn't find any other sources besides the ones he stated, which are, that comment in this way. And of course, in terms of those sources, he was deriving, he was inferring that what he said, what he shared with us. Okay. Next, new chapter. So, Vayal Avram Mitzrayim, Abraham went up from Egypt, meaning heading back to the land of Canaan. Huva Ishto, he and his wife, V'chol Shelo, together with everything that he possessed. V'lot imo Hanegba, and Lot was with him, and they went Hanegba to the south of the land of Canaan. Right. V'Avram kaved Ma'od, and Abraham was extremely kaved. The word kaved means heavy, all right? But it means he had many possessions, right? He was I wouldn't say overburdened, but kaved can also mean kavod, right? Honor. He had a great honor b'mikneh through cattle, over kesef, and with silver, over zahav and gold. Obviously, he was materially very, very, very prosperous. Take a look at here. For Avram Kaved. By the way, I starred this, so when I came across it at one point, I must have thought this was really a significant passage here. Tanya. So again, an early source, rabbinic source prior to the year 200. Rabbi Nahorai says, HaTorah mechabdato la'adam, that the Torah itself gives honor to a person. In other words, when you study Torah, you become honored. Umishmarto, and it guards him, mikol ra, from any evil, bena'aruto, in his youth, venotenet lo acharit, betikva, beziknato, and it provides him with a future and with hope in his old age. I think it guards him in his youth. I don't think Torah T'mimah is going to go into that, but I think that given one's youth and what is the temptations of youth, that studying the Torah and observing the Torah and following the Torah and living a life of Torah preserves you from some of the mistakes one might make in one's youth. And as far as a hope and a future, etc., we're talking about immortality. I think that's what it's referring to. V'chein ata motzeh ba'Avram, and thus you find regarding Abraham Avinu, our patriarch, shishamar et kol Torah, because he guarded the entire Torah. In other words, he lived his life according to the Torah, the principles of Torah. And the issue isn't so much because the Torah wasn't given until Mount Sinai, the Torah that we have, but the idea is that he understood, without having that written Torah in front of him, what it was to live a life in the light by the light of God. Umakativ day, and regarding what is written regarding him, benaruto, when he was young, Omer, it says, Avram kaved ma'od b'mikneh b'kesef v'zahav, right? So he's a lot younger at this point, young at the age of 75 or plus, right? Okay, but still, I mean, he died at 175, so you could say this was his youth, right? It says Abraham was kaved ma'od, was honored, deeply honored, perhaps, b'mikneh, with cattle, b'kesef v'zahav, silver and gold, uv'ziknato, and when he grew old, when he was a zaken, Omer, it says, and this is in Chayei Sarah, the parsha of Chayei Sarah, v'Avraham zaken ba b'yamim, it says, and Abraham was old, and he's of many years, he was many years old, v'Hashem berech et Avraham b'kol, and the Lord blessed Abraham with everything, in everything. Let's take a look here. So, brief comment here. He says, and look ahead, when we'll get to it, we'll look more deeply into this in Parsha Chayei Sarah. It's the last Parsha dealing with the life of Abraham and Sarah. But Pasuk regarding the verse, Avraham Zaken, where it says Abraham was aged, Me'inyan limud haTorah shel Avraham, regarding the study of Torah of Abraham's study of Torah. So kind of referring to what I was saying when it says, Abraham followed the Torah entirely, right? So we'll see when we get to that, please God. Let's see, v'yein od, and see further, me'inyan drasha zor, regarding this drasha, this interpretation, lefanenu, that is before us. Sof Parsha Tavo, at the end of the Parsha Ki Tavo, that's way down in the book of Deuteronomy. We should live so long to be able to get to that verse, but Pasuk, where it says there in that verse, Leman Taskilu, in order that you gain understanding, etc., that you gain wisdom, etc., etc. And this is where we're going to stop for today, and hopefully we'll be able to pick it up at some point next week. So we'll do that, and I'm going to mark the page, and we'll take a look. We'll be heading on to verse 3 at that point. So I'm going to stop the share and open it up to any thoughts, any comments, anything that you found interesting, etc. Yes? Silence.
He's muted.
Pardon?
He's
What did you?
muted himself.
Oh, Harlan, do you want to unmute?
I was wondering why Abraham fixed food for the 3 strangers that came to his tent, because they don't eat. Angels don't eat. Doesn't make sense.
Great point. So the answer is basically, as we say in English, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. So
Oh,
when Moses went up to heaven, he was up there for 40 days and 40 nights, and he didn't eat anything because he
yeah.
was up in heaven. And when the angels came down to earth, they ate because they were down on earth. So
Oh,
it's our
okay.
Jewish way of saying, when in Rome, do as the Romans do.
The 40 years, the Israelites, their clothes and their shoes weren't
Yes, it
they
says.
were good. They were good.
That's right. They didn't wear out. Yep.
Yeah, that's unusual. That's amazing.
Well, this is the point, and part of the idea is I think it's a way of trying to deal with the whole interesting subject of aging, because we know that there are some, that biologically there's some things that, like they're flowers that last a day, okay? Butterflies don't last very long, okay? Human beings on average last about 70 years, okay? A dog doesn't live as long. Turtles and parrots live centuries, I believe. They're able to do it, okay? So the question is, what is it? What is it exactly that ages, right? What is that process exactly? And I think their answer is they see it more from a divine point of view, because ultimately all life is subject to the divine. So just and not only biological life, but any kind of life. So even people's clothing and shoes and things like that. Not to say that there might not be natural reasons for these things happening, but ultimately even nature, even the rules and laws of nature are something that are divine. So yes, exactly. Thanks, Harlan. I'm going to stop the recording at this point.